Well, good morning. It's the appointed hour for the MAPS 3 Citizens Advisory Board meeting of July the 28th. We began by calling the meeting to order and recognizing and welcoming back our colleague Wayne Williams. Wayne has been through some trials and tribulations with his health over the course of the past few months, and Wayne, we've missed you, and we're really glad to have you back. Glad you could attend the subcommittee meetings this week, and we're really glad to have you back in this meeting. You bet. Well, you've been furnished with copies of the minutes of the June the 23rd meeting. Are there additions or corrections to those minutes? Would you approve them? It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of the June the 23rd meeting. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The minutes are approved. Item 3 is the MAPS 3 Revenue and Expenditure Report. And Eric, you're going to walk us through that?
I'd be happy to, Mr. Chairman. The report follows the same format that we've seen in previous months. This is the period ending May 31st, 2011. One of the items that I might bring to your attention is the report that was online for some reason had an incorrect year ending date. It actually says 2012. That's been corrected, and so it's something that, depending on the time at which you downloaded it, just know that that's been acknowledged. So otherwise, the figures are updated to show both revenues and expenditures. You'll see that the revenues through that period now exceed approximately $96 million, and then you'll see a summary by project of the expenditures. Primary expenditures, of course, are on Park, on the land acquisition, but then we also have several consulting contracts with ADG and other primary consultants working on health and wellness, 2 of the river projects as well. So those are the numbers that you're starting to see showing some positive movement. And with that, I can answer any questions that you might have.
I always take comfort in knowing that Michael Adams has looked at this really carefully. And so, Michael, anything you want to add to what here? It's great to have a financial guy among us. Well, thank you. Are there questions for Eric about the revenue or expenditures? If not, then let's move on to item 4 on the agenda. We have, this is an important item for both discussion and action today on the MAPS 3 implementation plan. I'm going to ask Eric if he will set the context for us and introduce a very familiar face.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, we've had a busy week this week with all of our subcommittee meetings meeting. One of the primary agenda items that each of you have seen is, of course, the draft implementation plan that's been developed by ADG. In the last month, and as we reported during this week, the City Council did take action just a few weeks ago and adopted the project timeline. So it established a milestone for us in that ADG had the information needed to now establish budgets. And as we learn, as we have projects that come sooner in the program and have some deflationary value, we have some that come later in the project order for some inflationary values. Those are all included in your packet today. We received several subcommittee comments, but with that, I'm actually going to have Mike make the same presentation that you've seen and offer the comments throughout the week, and then leading up to any discussion that we might wish to have as an advisory board. Staff is seeking your recommendation today to see if you're ready to move this forward to the City Council. So that is the item that we'd like for you to consider as you hear Mike make his presentation. Thank you, Mike.
Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Eric, thank you. Chairman McDaniel, committee members, it's always a pleasure to be here. I think I've seen most of you this week at one or another of the various subcommittee meetings. I'd like to point out to the committee that Councilman Mars, I believe, has attended every single one of the subcommittees meetings this week. Councilman Ryan, Councilman Shadid, and Councilman McAtee have also attended various subcommittee meetings. The other thing I want to do is thank Nicole Franklin at ADG, who very ably stepped in for me yesterday at the Wellness Center and Parks meetings. The presentation that I'm going to give today really is very similar. I mean, it is the same presentation that we've given to all of the subcommittees. There are a couple of recommended modifications that were made by some of the subcommittees. I will go into those at the end of the presentation, but until then I'll just run through the presentation as it was made to each of the subcommittees. Each of the subcommittees focused on their various project. This will be an opportunity for all of you to see all of the projects, the various conceptual scopes and budgets that have been developed. We've really talked, this first slide really, we've talked about this, both Eric and I, this morning as a setup to this presentation. There have been some minor formatting changes, and there are some other recommended changes that we'll get into later. The difference between, the difference between the program order that you previously recommended to council for approval and the implementation plan is that the implementation plan also includes conceptual scopes of work and conceptual budgets for each of the projects. That implementation plan, which was approved by City Council, is also a part of this implementation plan. We've talked before, we've done what we can to try to balance the individual needs of each individual subcommittee. We've listened to City Council, we've listened to the advisory board and the subcommittees in trying to balance these projects and both the timelines and the budgets. The timeline, the next slide is a copy of that project order or timeline which was approved by City Council, which we've just included for reference purposes. With respect to the budgets, and this is a little bit of review, all of the individual project budgets have most of the same components. Those components are consulting and architectural services, environmental testing, possible environmental remediation where required, geotechnical and construction testing on each of the projects. Land acquisition applies to many of the projects. There are a couple, Fairgrounds most notably, which has no land acquisition component to it, and project contingency. We calculated those costs, estimated those as best we could, and then backed into an amount for available construction dollars. The available construction dollars were then used to develop the conceptual scopes of work and to determine the approximate size of a building or the linear miles of sidewalks and trails, for example. Once again, the budgets were all, we utilized budgets as mid-program budgets. If all of the work in a particular project were to occur on January 1st, 2016, and I'll just use transit as an example, they have a $130 million budget. If everything were to be contracted the same day, January 1st, 2016, their budget for purposes of this implementation plan would have been $130 million. In order to provide parity among the projects and recognizing the fact that some would come early and some would come late, projects which commence, projects or phases of projects which commence after January 1st, 2016 have been increased by 3% per year. Projects or phases of projects which come prior to January 1st, 2016 are decreased by 3% per year. The cost figures that we've used, these conceptual cost figures that we've used for these projects are typically in 2011 dollars, so we've inflated those cost figures 3% a year over the life of the program as well. The first project is the Convention Center. We're just presenting these in the order that we've presented them throughout the entire process. So the order is not necessarily random, but we actually did it by project size and went from largest to smallest. The scope of the project is as listed in the document that you've seen. It's effectively to provide a a facility that would include convention center, exhibit hall, ballrooms, and some other facilities as well. Based on the inflation and deflation, since some of that project will occur prior to 2016, namely land acquisition and engineering, the budget for that project is about $252,000. $252 million. I know Mike would have gotten me on that. $252 million. We anticipate that that may build a total of approximately 470,000 square feet of total space, which is actually less than was indicated as the most desirable amount of space in the CSL study. One of the things that I'm going to do now, the Convention Center Subcommittee did approve the implementation plan, recommend the implementation plan for approval, but they did add some language to their recommended approval. And I'll just read that specifically to you so you understand what it was. Recommended adoption of the implementation plan with the amendment that the target budget for the Convention Center before adjustment for inflation or deflation be $280 million, and amending the Convention Center language to include the CSL Convention Center program recommendations. For those of you who aren't familiar, CSNL is a Convention Center consultant that has done work in the past for the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce, and it is the report that they provided to the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce that is the object of the part of this amendment. And they've asked that some of the slides and data that was part of that CSNL study be included as part of the implementation plan. Okay. If there are no questions about the Convention Center, I'll move on to the next project. Downtown Park.
Well, Chairman, I certainly will, but I'd rather, if you would, finish, and can we discuss that, or would you rather discuss it now? It may take me a while.
Just as a procedural matter, I think there are going to be a fair number of comments about the budget anyway, and I think that from the subcommittee standpoint, Sue is prepared and I'm prepared to comment on the recommendation of the Convention Center subcommittee, but we were thinking we would get through his presentation and then everyone around the horseshoe will get their opportunity to speak to that. If that's an agreeable process, perhaps we can, to make sure that we get through the whole plan, maybe we should save all of the comments and discussion till after the presentation. Is that agreeable?
Agreed.
Fine. Mike, why don't you move ahead then?
We shall so continue.
Thank you.
Downtown Park. The downtown park has been divided into 3 separate phases. There are 2 phases for the upper park, which consists of approximately 40 acres. The first phase of that park would include a relatively small amount, I say relatively compared to the overall park budget, to provide a way to land the Skydance Bridge on the on the upper park, and to possibly provide a landscape barrier at the far north end of the upper park. That comes fairly early in the program, as you're aware. The balance of the upper park work would be completed later in the program, and the lower park work would be completed toward the end of the program. The overall budget for that would be approximately $132 million. Modern streetcar and transit. Very little change to this from what you've seen in previous versions. It really is divided into 2 significant phases, although there are separate phases for rail procurement, car procurement, and construction, all of which occur in the first half of the program. The balance of the work for the streetcar would take place at the end of the program. The overall budget for that was $130 million. The deflated budget, because most of that work comes before January of 2016, is approximately $128 million. And just as a a little bit of additional information. That first phase is probably going to get 4 miles of track and 4 to 5 cars. That's the plan for that first phase. Oklahoma River improvements. A number of these improvements are scheduled for early on in the program. You may be aware that there's actually engineering underway right now, both for the stadium lighting, the event, the race course lighting, for the second 1,000 meters of the course, and a study is also underway for a feasibility study for the windscreens for that same area of the race course. Other projects that will occur early on include the Whitewater facility, which would hopefully be completed the first quarter of 2015 to help coincide with the possibility of hosting pre-Olympic events for the 2016 Rio Olympics. The overall budget for the river projects is approximately $57 million, down from the $60 million, because a significant portion of that is happening prior to 2016. State Fairgrounds. The State Fairgrounds work has been divided into 2 phases. One fairly small phase up front, which is approximately $5 million for some site improvements and for some additional parking. The second phase would also occur in the first half of the program fairly early on and involved a new exhibition hall. I believe they call it an exposition hall as opposed to an exhibition hall. The size of that hall, based upon the conceptual budget that we've developed, is going to be approximately, we believe, 230,000 square feet. The master plan, which provided some of the basis for the work that we've done, that was done by the Fair Board, had a desired 300,000 square foot exposition hall. We believe the available budget right now would accommodate approximately 230,000 square feet, and the Fair Subcommittee is very aware of that and understands that that would be a workable number for them. Senior health and wellness centers. These have been divided into 4 phases. We believe that that the budget, the conceptual budget that we have, will allow for 4 wellness centers. The budget numbers that we've used differ a little bit from some of the budget numbers that were provided by AIP, the consultant who is currently working with the wellness centers. Our budget's a little bit less than theirs. We do believe, based on conversations that we've had with our consultants, that wellness centers with appropriate and desired facilities can be built, given the budget, the conceptual budgets that we've developed. We're in the process right now. Actually, the Wellness Center Subcommittee has a consultant engaged to help decide what the programs would be for the individual wellness centers. We would, as soon as we can, actually very quickly expect to put out on the street RFPs both for the architectural services and for prospective partners for the first wellness center. We expect to have those on the street in the next several months. So that would be, those are the key elements in getting the first wellness center started. With respect to the second, third, and fourth, we've allowed a little bit of time in between completion of each of those to allow for some lessons learned and to allow for other potential partners to be able to come to the table so that we can make sure that each of the wellness centers meets the specific needs of the community that it's going to serve. Trail improvements. The trail improvements budget is one of the more difficult budgets to deal with in some ways, simply because one of the things that's happened since the original 50 miles of conceptual trail was brought up and was part of some of the early marketing materials. Budgets that were used to prepare that and show that 50 miles, that anticipated 50 miles, were done when the price of asphalt was somewhere in the neighborhood of two-thirds of what it is today. And the significant cost for these trails is asphalt. And there are some other aspects of that that we've looked at, including land acquisition, that we believe that we may not be able to build at this point more than 32 miles of that 50 miles. There are a lot of things that can happen between now and the actual time that of construction for those trails that could influence that and raise the number of miles that can be built. But we've tried to maintain a conservative approach to this so that we've tried to be as realistic and conservative as we can in anticipating what those dollars will buy based on what we know today. Trail Subcommittee is very aware of this. We have 3 trails phases, all of which are going to occur fairly early in the program. And those include trails from Overholser to the river, from Hefner to the river, a trail at Draper, and as part of the same 3rd phase with Draper, a possible trail near the airport that would connect to the river trail. Sidewalks. The good news is, when I met with that committee which does both sidewalks and trails, sidewalks is a good story. We anticipate, based on the budget that's budgets and scopes of work that we've done, that we may be able to build the 70 miles of trail that were anticipated in some of the early marketing materials. That's based on a 4-foot wide sidewalk. Some sidewalks may actually be required to be wider than that based on city requirements and desires. But overall, we think that there's a significant budget, that the budget there is will allow for approximately 70 miles of sidewalk. We are in the process with both the sidewalks and the trails of, and actually city staff is preparing RFQs, requests for qualifications, for consultants, actually in this case mostly engineers, to provide initial engineering work, surveying, and identification of possible areas for sidewalks to occur, and an engineer to begin work on developing actual scopes of work and specifications and plans for the trails. And that, we expect those to be out in the next 2-3 weeks. Is that correct, Eric? Sidewalks and trails.
So included is, in your packet, are the 2 advertisements that will actually be released this week.
Okay.
But the due dates are included, and so you'll see those, and we can cover those now or later in the meeting as well.
Okay. The last component of the overall program budget is in 2 pieces. One of those we've labeled infrastructure. It's $30 million. The second component is a $17 million overall program contingency, which we've carried both of these numbers from the very beginning. The total of $47 million is in fact included in the $777 million projected total program cost. Next steps, obviously one of the next steps is for the advisory committee to consider and make recommendations to City Council with respect to this implementation plan that we've provided today and which has been reviewed by each of the subcommittees. There were, before I finish, there were several other recommended changes that to the document. One, actually two came out of that I'm going to mention, came out of the River Subcommittee. We need to correct the name of the Oklahoma City Arena, which now is the Chesapeake Energy Arena. It appears incorrectly in the document. We'll make that change. And they've also asked that we add the word paddling to the word rowing when we describe what we've typically referred to as the rowing venue, since paddling, canoe, kayak, and flatwater canoe and kayak have become such significant components of the river and the future events that would occur at the river. There were really no other recommended modifications from any of the other subcommittees. There were a number of comments in some of the subcommittees, and I'm sure that the chairs of those subcommittees can bring those forward as they deem appropriate. But once this advisory committee has made a recommendation, it will be presented to City Council. Hopefully that would be done in August for City Council's review. The implementation plan is not final until City Council approves it, and I use the word final. It's final at this point in time. It will continue to be reviewed by ADG and by city staff for changes in sales tax revenues, for changes to schedule based on from some of the projects, and any other pertinent information that comes to us. And if and when necessary, we will be bringing recommended modifications to the plan to the advisory committee for possible change by City Council.
Mike, we'd like to ask you to stay close to the microphone
I was afraid you might do that.
as the discussion ensues. And while everyone is gathering their thoughts about questions and discussion, wanted to retreat just a moment, if Amanda permits me to do this. Eric points out to me that we needed to do more than ask about questions.
We could do that after.
I'm ready to do it now while it's on my mind. And that is, we did not ask for a vote on receiving the revenue and expense report, and we need to get that incorporated in the minutes. So since we've taken no further action since then, would you receive the report about the revenue and expense? That was the previous item on the agenda. I asked for questions, but I didn't ask you to receive the report. Will you receive it? It's been moved and seconded that we receive the report. As many as favor of that motion say aye. It is received. Now we're back on track. Well, for the purpose of a structured discussion about this, one of the major recommendations came from the Convention Center Committee. So I'm going to ask Sue Hooper if she would basically put that in a context for how that came about and what the basis of that is. Michael?
Tom, I think most of this discussion probably around budget issues. Can I ask Mike a non-budget issue before we get...
Sure.
Mike, real quick. I'm sorry? Mike, tell me again about the on the senior wellness centers and your thoughts about the RFP and the timeline. I may have misunderstood that.
We're currently planning to put out an RFQ for architectural services for the design of the first wellness center, and an RFP, a request for proposals, from prospective partners for the first wellness center. It would probably, the RFP for the prospective partners will take a little bit longer to get prepared than a typical RFQ for architectural or engineering services, because this is in fact a fairly unique undertaking for the city. So ADG and city staff are going to be working together to work with our consultant and other consultants to prepare those documents. There are a number of legal issues which need to be considered and provided as part of this RFP process. And we think it'll take 4 to 5 weeks to actually put together a draft of this proposal. But those two proposals would be going out not quite simultaneously, but almost, depending on when we actually have a draft that's approved by the advisory committee and city council.
Yeah, I think I can, as we discussed in the subcommittee meetings, there's two different processes for hiring consultants or hiring an engineer or an architect to work on the building. And so the RFP actually needs to go before this board and city council before it can be issued. The one that's for an architect or an engineer we can actually do as a staff level function. So we will time those, but the goal is to have both of those drafts ready next month for the subcommittee to review.
Well, that's what I thought, and then I kind of thought Mike gave me the impression it might be a little bit longer than that. That was why I asked the question.
I may have given the impression that I was giving myself more time to do that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Tom. Thank you for letting me ask that.
You heard Michael describe a proposed amendment from the Convention Center Committee, and Sue is going to begin that discussion, which will be open to everyone around the horseshoe, but Sue's going to begin that discussion with an explanation of the action of the Convention Center Committee. Sue?
Well, the Convention Center Committee asked Eric several questions, and actually Eric looked for us and did some review of the published documents. So that kind of reinforced what the committee felt was communicated to the public about the budget of $280 million for the Convention Center proposed budget. So that's where that came from, and that's why we included that, again, as the amendment to accepting the proposal. Of course, that's as increase or decrease based on adjustments for inflation or deflation based on the midpoint of 2016. And the fact that we felt like that was part of our business, and we were attending to the Convention Center business and the budget for the Convention Center.
Just to expand on that briefly, there has been a spirited discussion at each of the Convention Center Committee meetings about whether the budget should be $250 million or $280, and the issue centers on, as Sue has already said, the published material before the vote said publicly that there would be a $280 million budget for the Convention Center. Included in some people's thinking as they brought that forward to the public was that there might be the requirement of the moving of an OG&E substation that might be close to where the Convention Center could possibly be. The selection of the site and the approval by the council of the site makes it, at least from the Convention Center's standpoint, probably not required to move the OG&E substation. So the issue that staff has been working with is, if we're not going to have to move that substation, they've been working with and have instructed Mike to use $250 million as the working number for the Convention Center. So the discussion that's taken place in our committee is that consistent with what we told the public we were going to do in a convention center? Now, add to that the fact that the material that Mike said that the committee asked to be included, and what are the acronyms for the report, the CPL report?
CS&L.
CS&L report. And we heard much from the representative of the Convention and Visitors Bureau representative on our committee that if we spent $250 million in his terms, we would not move the needle up much. We would not improve our relative position in terms of competing for conventions, whereas if we spent the $280, and I'll not go into the details as to why, but I'll just say that that money could be well used to move us up relative to the competition. So armed with that, the committee proposed the amendment that that you have before you. And for the purposes of clarifying it in my thinking, to get to the 277 or 777 million, I'm not saying it's that 30 million, but there has been 30 million added to the contingency fund. It was 17 million. What Mike presented to you is 47 million now. So that 30 million would be in play for all the projects. And so the question before us is whether or not you want to approve the budget as presented, which would include $250 million for the convention center, or whether the $30 million that was, at least in some people's thinking, in there at the time we presented it to the voters, should remain in the convention center budget. That's at least the way I viewed what the discussion centered on, and is the issue that we need to decide. In addition to that, there was some thought that the location of the OG&E substation might have some bearing on the park, and that therefore the park committee should consider that as well. And Kimberly Lowe yesterday raised that issue with the park committee, and it was discussed, and there was, I invite Kim to comment on it as well, but at least my observation from being there was that there was no movement in that committee to say we got to have that money to move the OG&E station. So I think that kind of sets the stage for the issue that's before us. Michael Adams was at the meeting as well. Councilman Mars was there. And I invite anybody that wants to now to comment on it, but I think that's the issue that we need to decide today to take this matter forward. And I guess I should add this. What is to happen to that $30 million our committee feels like is a matter for the city council to decide. That is, we don't decide the political issues about what was promised or not promised, and whether or not that money should be spread around differently. But we think our goal should be today to, in some form or another, get a resolution to bring that forward to the council and get a decision so that Mike and his folks and all of our subcommittees will know how we should move forward. Is that a fair representation, Council Morris? Yes, it is. Anybody else? I'm going to ask Michael first because he was there. Do you feel, is that what you heard at the committee meeting with Sue and me?
Yes, I think so. And I guess I don't think it was discussed yesterday, but as I recall, in the site selection process for the convention center, that $30 million was a factor in rating the various sites. One site was going to require that $30 million, and another was not. And whether it would have changed the end decision as the site, it certainly would have changed the scoring.
Yes.
And it would have changed, the evaluation process somewhere. So I think, at least in that process, it was assumed the $30 million would be available for the convention center regardless of where it went.
I think that's a fair assessment of what the committee thought, but this is our chance to know what all of you think. And Rusty, you asked to be heard on this. You're next.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. And I agree with everything you said, and I appreciate it, Michael, the agreement with that. And you made a comment, this is for the council to decide, and I would agree if they want the $30 million to not be part of the convention center, that's fine, and we'll leave it up to them, and like to know why. In the meantime, though, as I look at the plan, and I'd like to ask, Mike, do you happen to have the full plan? What we've seen here is just slides. There's some, you've presented some of the pages, but there were 9 pages before those and another 5 after that. Do you have the full plan that we can look at? There's page 9, it's the summary of the budgets. Yeah, it's the one Mr. Adams is showing. This is the whole actual plan, right? It was in our packet, but
Correct.
we have it to pull up now.
Yeah, what I've presented to you today is merely a condensed version of it and just a summary explanation.
Okay, well, I would say separate from the Convention Center Subcommittee, when I pulled up the agenda for, when I pulled up the plan over the weekend, I looked at it. I got to page 9, which is the full budget page. It's the overall budget page. I was very surprised and thought it was wrong and inaccurate, and I know why you put it there, but I consider it wrong and came up with the exact same amendment that the Convention Center Subcommittee came up with. It's just a change. It's not correct at 250. The wording used on page 9 is published pre-election budget 250, and that to me is just incorrect. And Sue, you alluded to, Eric pulled up the materials, and I think that's just proven. And I brought a particular page, a couple pages actually. I'd like to pass around if that's okay. Chairman, do you mind? I have two that I'll pass around. I'll start with this one. It's the current website of the City of Oklahoma City on the Convention Center, and it shows $280 million, and that's as of today. That's not pre-election published, but I'll get to that, the next one. Mike, if you'd like to see it, or here's some extras, Mike, if you or the city staff needs those. It just is what it is. The current city website says 280, and I consider it's because that's what it's always been. More importantly, the next one I'll pass around, and I'm going to show it here, that our original book we were given, this advisory board, this was it. This was our resource guide. Tab 1 of this is this flyer I'll pass around. And you'll note it says vote December 8th. It is the published pre-election materials, if you ask me. I don't see any way around it. I think it is very clear and undisputable that it's the published pre-election budget was 280, and so page 9 of the plan is just, when I saw that wording, I thought, well, we can't say that. That's just not correct. Then it gets to all the other, whether it should be reduced to 250, again, Councilman Mars and the rest of the council, if they want to discuss that and want it to be 250, I'll listen. I will disagree for different reasons that our chairman just mentioned. But in the meantime, I can't pass on an implementation plan and recommend it up to the city council saying that the published pre-election budget was 250, because to me that would become a spot where it hasn't been changed properly. We said one thing to the citizens. There's these different materials. I have others I could pass out. It says 280 everywhere, and it always has in it. The only time I've seen it printed that it did not say 280 was at the workshop with the council. It was a draft implementation plan by ADG. When we got to that page, I asked the council and the mayor to discuss it and say, well, why is this 250? I thought it was 280. There was a discussion. It was not determined. It was not concluded. I know I asked that they give some clarity for both our advisory board and the citizens. I still don't think it's been made clear as to if they want to change it in 280, but to me it's clearly always been 280, and so I would be in full agreement with the recommendation by the Convention Subcommittee on it needing to be 280 in the plan, especially if we're going to have the language that it's the published pre-election budget.
Well, anyone else want to be heard on this?
Well, I would agree with Rusty. I think the material says 280. None of us, I think, were in the room when the budgets were set and know how they were established and whether the $30 million was specifically identified for a particular project, and that to me has to come from a higher power than we. We don't. We weren't there, so we don't know what considered. And certainly, if it is changed, I mean, it can be changed, and that's obviously known. But at this point in time, I think it's only appropriate that we consider it to be 280.
Kimberly, I mentioned your name from the Parks Committee. Do you want to be heard on this?
Well, I was going to say when it came around the horseshoe time for parks, certainly this was an item of discussion yesterday, as the park will have one of its views being the current substation that's there. And I think the big contention, again, is what did we promise the citizens? And that's what MAPS 3 is all about, I think, from the viewpoint of all of us here as representatives, is that it's our job to recommend that we stick to that plan, at least to the council. The council can decide. Certainly, the budgets for all of these projects began years before the votes ever took. So many things could have come into all of these factors, but none probably that has as much electricity, pardon the pun, as the substation itself. We talked about yesterday the fact that what if we built a park right next to a substation? As a matter of fact, Councilman Shadid was at our meeting, and he just came back from a convention, I believe, in Wisconsin or Minnesota. Minneapolis. Okay. And he had a great picture on his phone, which he shared with the whole committee, of a beautiful park with a substation right inside of it. And it was gorgeous. It was a piece of art within the park. So, it came to that point where it was realized that the convention center, I think, everyone recognized needs to have its full budget. And, you know, if we have to be really creative on how we beautify a substation downtown, I think we have the ability to do that.
Thank you, Kim.
I do have one question, just as a matter of information. The verbiage that the Convention Center Committee wanted added to this, was that excerpts from the executive summary from the CSNL study, or they were slides from a presentation from CSL?
There were slides from the report that was submitted to the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce. Mike Carrier from the Convention and Visitors Bureau provided copies of those slides, and those are the slides that we would incorporate. The nature of those slides, just so you know, was primarily to demonstrate how competitive cities rank with Oklahoma City regarding the amount of available convention center space.
Which obviously was information that was in that executive summary.
Yeah, I think it was.
Okay, I remember reading that. All right, thank you.
Michael Dover?
The first time I think I just have a question. So on your draft proposal, Mike, it says the infrastructure approved by City Council, $30 million. Where did that come from, the approved by City Council? It's on your report.
If I might respond on Mike's behalf, as we were setting the budgets, and as many have alluded to, the workshop was one of the drivers for maintaining the information that you have in the plan today. But simply, I think what you'll read on that particular page is that we're leaving it to City Council discretion on how to use those funds that are identified in that page. They're not allocated to a specific project in the draft document. So that's not a decision that's been made. It's something that will be made in the future.
But there is a differentiation here between approved and it says to be approved. So that's not exactly correct then. Is that correct, Eric?
Let me pull that page up.
Well, it says approved by City Council, $30 million. To be approved, the contingency of $17 million. One suggests one has been done in the
I
other.
think we can clarify that. Generally speaking, those funds are not allocated to any project as a part of the implementation plan. It would require some sort of council action, a recommendation of this advisory board and council action to then reallocate funds that would fall into that category to a project or for some other use.
I see.
Is the intent.
I see. Okay. I think I see. I'm not quite sure I still understand. But just a couple of other thoughts. I think back to, and I think Rusty made reference to perhaps the mayor's presentation at our first advisory board meeting, and $30 million being in that presentation for the relocation of the substation. And I think back to that workshop that I walked away. And I walk away from a lot of meetings confused. I would tell you all that. And I certainly walked away from that particular workshop still unclear in my mind over this $30 million and where it came from and where we were going to move the substation, where those monies were going to go. And I think it's because of those kind of confusion that, at least where I fit, and frankly, because of this timeline issue that also was brought to the advisory board by the convention subcommittee, the timing of all of this, I think, it seems to me, is better left that this issue, as I think Councilman Mars suggested, ultimately it's going to be decided by the council anyway. I just don't want to walk away from this advisory board meeting kind of thinking about, well, here we go again. And that, listen, I applaud that subcommittee. I'd like to sit down and dinner with most of those guys and sit and visit about projects that they're interested in for the city. And I don't run in those circles, and I'm not sitting around at that table. But having said that, I think that there's a lot of information about this whole issue that I don't even have, and therefore it makes it difficult for me to think that I can even vote on this with the kind of degree of certainty because I think it is important that I think it has. And so because of that, and even this issue like I just raised of the $30 million and the $17 million and the contingency or not, I think it is the council who kind of needs to kind of ultimately decide this. I'm not sure in my mind that it has been decided clearly, but I'll ask you, Eric, is it decided, as far as where you sit, the city sits, that the consideration for relocating the substation is completely off the table? That's a moot point since the convention center is the site that it is?
I don't believe that's been answered, no. So I believe that's still on the table. And I think to better answer the $17 million, $30 million question, the $17 million was always included in the contingency. I don't think there's question about that. And again, that's a discretionary fund. It's assuming a $777 million collection. But in regard to the $30 million question and your question now, exactly, there has not been a response. There has not been a decision whether the substation needs to move or not. And simply reserving those funds for a council decision for them to make regarding that is one of the ways that we've addressed it in this report.
And that's why I think that I would like to move forward with this report as it's presented for that very reason, because it seems to me to do otherwise is making some assumptions that we don't even know are true yet.
Zane?
I'd like to add to that, because we've already, as stated in the report, we know that we're already behind and we're not going to be able to build the miles of trails that we've told the public. So if we want to go back and say, we've got to do something because what we told the public before we voted, we said that we were going to build 70 miles.
Trails was actually 50 miles.
50 miles, and you're already down to 32, right?
Based on
We're
our
not
conceptual budget.
complying with what we told the citizens we were going to do. So I think to start taking the money out from different, whether it was originally designed to put here or there, I think it is up to the city council to decide that, because trails are an issue along with health and wellness, that this city is very interested in, and we're being pushed out to the right already. And now we know that we're not going to get the total mileage that we told people that we're going to get. So I think it's up to the city council to decide if that money should be put towards the convention center or some other program.
And if I might just offer a brief comment. Again, the budgets that you have in the implementation plan today are draft and conceptual. We would recommend their approval as such, with any comments and direction of council also. But when we talk about 32 miles of trail, we're going to look for every opportunity to extend that. And I think there was a lengthy discussion in our trail subcommittee meeting about that. Obviously, the trails have been budgeted for a certain detail, a certain section, a certain amount of improvements. And I think there's going to be some room, once we actually have an engineer or a consultant on board, to make certain recommendations that might get us further. And that would apply to each of the projects. But as Mr. Mize has presented, I mean, we will have an established budget that we're going to work towards. And we're going to maximize that to its benefit. And so each of these is going to be a challenge. I don't think it's just trails. I think we're going to find that on sidewalks. We're going to find that on our building projects like the convention center and the wellness centers. We'll find that also on the Whitewater facility. But we will utilize those funds to their maximum, and the projects will be successful.
Kim?
I might go back to the point that says that if we look back originally to the charge of what this advisory board is supposed to do, we are supposed to make our recommendations to council. So if there are items that we feel that the council should consider in addition to this, then we just need to add them to our recommendation of the report. If you read back to what Rusty said, submitted for all of us to look at today and reminding us, it says more than 50 miles of trails. So we can say we would like to recommend that we move forward with this report. However, looking at the contingency funds that are available, or excess revenues that may be collected, let's try to get back to that 50 miles or more. Let's ask to add those things in as they're available. And then the council obviously will always have the ability to make those amendments and changes and ratifications, as Councilman Mars has reminded us many times along the way. So we can keep the process moving forward, but not thwart our thoughts.
Michael?
I agree, I guess, Zane, with you that it's the council decision, but it seems to me like if we're pulling $30 million out of what was the published convention center budget and throwing it into a contingency, then we are making that decision. And it is ultimately their decision, but I don't know that, without knowing, how that was developed and what the thought process was, I don't feel comfortable in making that decision to pull it out of what was published as their budget and putting it into the contingency.
Anyone else? Sue?
I personally don't see anywhere on this where it says 30 million. There's no 30 million project. And I do understand a 17 million contingency fund. So I don't want a report that has 30 million in it, because then we approve it.
All right?
And then one final thought, Tom, but again, I sit back and people that I talk to, I can tell you that there are people in the community who have used that number, and we've used it, of $30 million. So obviously, at some point, it has been a consideration that we knew that that if that substation needed to be moved, I don't know how good that number is, but at least that's the number we were told that's what that was for. And of course, that $30 million was part of the $777 million. And I go back again to, because of this confusion and because of this unclarity, I think if we would go ahead and approve Mike's the ADG's proposal as recommended, it doesn't mean that money is not going to ultimately be at the convention center anyway. What it does do, it seems to me, is just give the council and this process the opportunity to kind of make those decisions when those decisions need to be made. And that's my final thought.
Well, Councilman? I'm sorry.
Just a quick comment, and the 30 million, I'll get plenty of time to debate that at some point in time. I'll reserve my pros and cons on that till then. I do think it's important that the advisory board do send a recommendation forward to the council, because that'll be one of the first questions, is what's the recommendation of the advisory board. And we ask that, and we see that with almost everything that comes forward, whether it be the planning commission or anything else. We see what that recommendation is from that group. So I think it is important to do that. But that's for this board to make the decision on and send it forward. And I can assure you that whichever way you go will not stop the discussion on the $30 million issue, because that's a well-known meeting coming up, I guess is a way to put it. We know that that's coming forward. I would just say one thing, that in reference to projects getting less in a project than you may have thought originally, there's a difference between lowering a budget and getting less, and there's a difference between keeping the same budget and you just couldn't get as much when the bids come in. And that happens all the time. It happens all the time. We'll put out a project, put it out for bid. The budget never fluctuates. The budget's always what we had money to bid, but what comes back and what we're able to do is sometimes less, sometimes it's more, depending on how your bids come in. So the concept of not getting as many miles of trails or sidewalks, when you think of it in the context of the budget for the trails and sidewalks never changed. You just didn't get as much for your money depending on the economy the way it is. That's a whole lot different than changing the budget for sidewalks and lowering the amount you get at the same time. But again, this will be discussed at great length whichever way this board decides to go on it, and I'll have to say again, I may have to say at every meeting, I can't tell you how much we appreciate all of your work and all of the committees and all the other committee members, because it's not easy to sit and volunteer your time and try to give that information a lot of thought and so forth, and then you hear things later on that might infer that we're not happy with what's going on, and that's absolutely not the truth. This is a great group, and we look forward to many years of putting these projects on the street and having successful completion of the map series.
Michael?
I love this kind of this discussion. I think it would be pretty boring, and it wouldn't do the job that I think we should be doing, and that is having different perspectives come forth. So I think we all agree with that. Having said that, if it's in order, I would like to move that we accept Mike Mises and ADG's report to move on to, as printed, to move on to the council.
Michael, we're not through with the discussion yet, so I'm going to say that
That's not in
out of
order.
order, because
Okay.
I'd like to comment on it as well. But I will recognize you after that.
I apologize.
No problem.
For jumping the gun.
Anybody else?
I'd like to, I guess, just for clarity purposes, Eric, perhaps you can enlighten us a little bit. The substation itself is located a block off of the park property, and what's the impact? I mean, I think there's probably overhead power lines that are crossing the park property. What exactly is the impact of the substation to the MAPS projects?
So there is an existing OG&E substation that's directly across the street from the proposed park.
It'll be on the border of the park.
It's across the street. So there's actually a street,
Right.
two
But
lanes
it's
that's
not-
separated.
There's not a block separating it.
No, it's just a street separation. And it's existing, and it obviously services a large portion of downtown. I mean, it is a large facility, and so and there's a lot of service that comes from that. What leaves a substation is very different than what you see in a neighborhood. These aren't small power poles that then go into individual buildings. Those are considered distribution lines or service lines. What leaves this substation are very tall transmission lines.
Right.
Very high voltages, and there are two that leave that facility, one to the west that currently crosses the park through the northern portion of that park that will be relocated at some point, we would believe. But it looks that is in a street right-of-way. That is something that probably does have some alternate routing that we can work through. But there is actually a second transmission line that was relocated as a part of the I-40 relocation that actually cuts across the southern eastern portion of the park at about a 30 or 45 degree angle. It's not in a street right-of-way, and so it's going to be a little more challenging to relocate that one. It's possible that those transmission lines will have some cost. It's not something that we've approached OG&E yet, but in a lot of cases they do work with the city, but it's possible there could be some cost associated with those. Obviously, moving the substation would come at a significant cost, and the early estimates for that were in the $30 million range.
Okay. So I guess from the park perspective, certainly it's for their recommend, but I don't think they want the transmission lines crossing over the park. So we need to at least consider relocating or taking those underground or whatever can be done in that regard. As far as the substation on the border of the park, that would seem to me to be more of a Court-Assured and development issue. I mean, they're going to have difficulty in trying to get somebody to develop something along the edge of the park if they're going to wrap it around a substation.
I think as we look at each project, I mean, whether it's the new convention center site, whether it's new wellness center sites or the park, I mean, we're going to have significant site projects that have nothing to do with the building or the improvement that we're going to do. We're going to have to look at utilities that are subgrade, whether they're water lines, sewer lines, gas lines. I mean, there's a lot of study yet to occur on each of the project sites. And so that comes with the project. And the budgets that you've been presented today in the construction category are assumed to include all of that necessary work, not just the building, but all of the site preparation. Addressing environmental issues. You know, if we run into old underground storage tanks, if we run into the subsurface issues that we need to address with water or other hazards, that's all in that construction number. We've been very successful on the previous MAPS projects addressing that in this exact same format. So what comes as a recommendation from this advisory board and the budgets being adopted, the goal of, course, the staff is to put together a $777 million program, and that's what you have before you today. The monies have been allocated by project using some methodology, and then there's been some reserve for some contingency. But ultimately, you know, we will work with those budgets and we'll develop the projects to their maximum benefit. On the park, there's going to be a lot of utilities, either, and I mentioned this, other than even the transmission, that we're going to have to take care of. There's a lot of streets to close. There's a lot of things we just simply haven't gotten into yet because we don't own all the property.
I just want to make sure information-wise you understand that the substation came up in relevance to the ground that it sits on, not the lines that come out of it. The substation was never an issue with the park as far as the lines going over it. The substation issue was that one of the convention center sites needed the actual ground that the substation sits on. So that's what was, that's when the discussion about moving the substation was, because it would have to physically go away, not that it was an appearance factor or that the lines went over the park.
The relocation of the transmission lines was already contemplated, I guess, in the park project, that's what you're saying. And the substation itself doesn't sit on a MAP site as it exists today.
Michael?
Well, I might ask Councilman March. So, Councilman March, I make sure I understand. It was a part of the budget, the $30 million, but if that site was selected, that was part of those monies was to relocate that substation?
Yeah, it was when the convention center project and the maps started rolling in and they started doing all the project, if you remember, all of the initial stuff talked about the convention center and its possible location next to the Court of Shore Park. And the substation would have to move if that was the site selected. So that's the reason that it was put in the budget there.
So where were those monies going to come from to move that substation?
It's in the convention center money.
Okay.
That's in the 280. That's why you saw 280 in all the figures.
So the fact that then the convention center is not on that site, that $30 million isn't needed?
Chairman.
Well, that's still, there are people that still want to move the substation. And if the council ultimately votes to move the substation, then all this argument is moot because you're spending the $30 million to move the substation. But that's, you know, whether that happens or not will be that meeting that I keep referring to. That now I'm trying to figure out how I can be on vacation for.
But it sounds like then what you just said, if the substation doesn't need to be moved, then the budget for the convention center would be the $250 million.
Well, I'm not going to respond to that because I'll respond to it on that Tuesday. But I think that you've got people that say that the convention center budget was published at 280, just like all the other budgets were published at a certain number, and they're in the literature at a certain number. Convention centers is the only one that you've reduced, or you're proposing to reduce.
Chairman, if I may, and I'd say it's not only that, it's not only what was published, it's also that, and Councilman's reserving his comment until his council meeting, but I would not say that the convention center now where it's going to be located doesn't need that $30 million. It might. It might need it for underground excavation. It might need it for whatever. The budget is $280 million. There may be a similar issue like the removal of the substation that now is an issue at the location that's been chosen. And that discussion was had is when it was being determined what location, it was a positive that there was no substation to be moved there, and it freed up that $30 million for something else like underground excavation. So he doesn't respond to whether or not it's needed. I would say we'll leave that up to them later. It may be needed.
And I might also say that as all of these MAPS projects were originally budgeted for the vote, they all included line items, hundreds of them, ones that we'll never have that information. We don't need that information. It's irrelevant. There could have been $40,000 or $40 million that in the park for remediation. If it's not needed, it'll be used somewhere else. The budget's the budget. That's what was approved. So again, haggling over something that's a line item within an item, just it seems it's above our head, and we're trying to swim in a pond that we don't need to be in.
Well, at the risk of slightly a different view about it, I think it is a pond that we need to be in because we need to move this. We need to move this forward today, and I'm seeing it as a completely different issue, and I'm agreeing with Councilman Mars that it is one thing to change a published budget in the allocation of the funds, and what we have before us is we have moved $30 million from the convention center budget to the contingency budget. And that's a completely different thing than saying how much are we going to get within the budget. As the councilman has already said, whether we get all the miles for the trails is a function of what we can get for what was in the budget. What we're talking about here is we haven't come in as a convention center committee and said we're going to get fewer square feet because of the budget. We haven't said we need more money because we need something else. We're saying this was the published budget. And just as one member of the committee, that's important to me in the integrity of the process that we have. Keeping faith with what we told the public we were going to do. Every one of us has been quoted as saying, we want to deliver to the public a bang for their buck, and we want to deliver to them the best product we can based on what we told them we were going to do. And if there's going to be a reallocation of it, as Kimberly has already said, that if they're going to reshuffle the deck and decide, well, gee, there are other needs that are paramount, then that's the council's job to do and not ours. And I think if we send forth the budget that Mike has brought to us today, that does constitute a reallocation because we have shifted the number from 280 to 250 in this budget if we approve that. If we send it back as 280 and they say move the 30, that's their job, and that's okay. And I'll be happy with whatever the council decides about it. But I don't think we're doing our job if we try to, around this table, reallocate what we told the public, what the council told the public, and what the mayor told the public we're going to do with this money. And I'm not going to vote to send it forward with a reallocation of the money. And I will abide by whatever everybody else wants to do, but that's only one vote. But I think that we have to be true to what we told the public we were going to do. Well, with that, any other discussion?
All I was going to say is I must have misrepresented my point, because
No.
I do agree.
No, I know you.
I do agree with you.
Just one final, and then I promise you I'm not going to beat this horse to death, Tom, even though some of y'all think it's on its last legs, perhaps. And that is, I go back, though, to if the intent of the convention center was to put that $30 million in it because of that particular site, then another alternative could be is that we tell the public that we don't need $30 million because we're not putting that convention center, which is why that was budgeted that way, and we'll stop maths, I don't know how many months before we'll stop math, and we say the taxpayers $30 million. That would be an approach. That would be another way of looking at, going back to the intent, what we promised the voters.
And that's just a fact we don't have now, whether we need it or whether we don't. And so we've got to vote today, and we can't assume something that we don't know the answer to, I don't think. What we do know is what was published. Sue?
Eric, I have a question for you on sending forward this report. Can we send this report forward with more than $777 million?
I would say not. I mean, that is the anticipated collection, which is the MAPS 3 budget.
Okay.
Amanda, you're leaning forward in your seat. You want to be heard about something?
If you're ready for the motion, Mr. Dover's motion has to be considered at this time since it is still pending. You have to ask for a second and consider the first before it.
Amanda, I am so sorry, but I could not understand what you said. Would you mind? I apologize for that.
I just wanted to remind the chairman that Mr. Dover's motion is on the floor, so
Yes.
it needs to be considered
Yes.
when it's time before any other motion is considered.
Exactly. I understand that. Is the discussion concluded? Then we have a motion for the approval of moving forward with the report as presented, which would include $250 million for the convention center, all the other numbers that you have seen, and the contingency fund at $47 million. That is the report. Is there a second to that motion?
I have a question. If we move it forward the way that it's written, with the Convention Center Subcommittee's addition, does that not request that the $30 million be moved back to their project?
Yes,
Eric,
but
you want
that's
to
not the
address that?
motion.
We can easily provide the Convention Center Subcommittee information also to the council, what came out of that subcommittee. It wouldn't be a part of this motion unless it's amended into the motion.
That's what
or
my
such.
clarification is, that the
Right
motion
now,
is
the motion
this.
is as stated by Mr. Dover, but, there's no amendments. Now, through procedure, if that motion wishes to be amended by the group, that is possible. We can go in a series of directions.
Well, we have the motion, and we don't have a second. So why don't we see if there's a second for the motion, then we'll discuss the motion. Is there a second for the motion? The motion dies for lack of a second. Is there another motion?
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to approve the plan, but with these certain changes. The first would be to correct the name of the arena, as mentioned by the River Subcommittee. The second would be to add paddling, as they've recommended. The third would be to add the word "to." Frankly, that was a good catch by Mr. Dover. On page 18 of the plan, it is slightly different. I think I'm sorry, that will actually be eliminated now that I think about it. And that's what I wrote here. On page 18, we would eliminate the $30 million infrastructure. The next change would be, in that regard, on page 9 and page 10 to change 250 to 280. I believe on page 10 on the Convention Center, now that the total is changed, you will be missing a line item. So I'd ask you, I guess, to put it into additional contingency of the convention center on page 10. And then, as I said, on page 9, the 250 would change to 280. And to be clear, that would make it consistent with the published pre-election budget. And any other changes that you felt you heard from the subcommittees, but I believe that was it.
I'm sorry.
A long motion.
I'm sorry, I don't have the page numbers, but is this page 10?
Yes.
Okay.
We're changing that around. I say change it to 280. Change it to reflect, and with the inflation adjustments, but would reflect.
And I
280.
believe you said add a line item. The way that I would suggest that be changed is that the overall midpoint budget be changed to $280 million, which will have a relative impact on each of the other line items rather than adding a line item.
Or would it just change the contingency amount?
No, it would, the way these numbers are calculated, it would change all of those numbers, except for the land acquisition and site prep. The architectural engineering fee number would change, the contingency would change, and the amount of the construction, available construction dollars would change also.
If I might offer, the motion that was made by this Convention Center Subcommittee, again, was that the budget before the adjustments are made be returned to $280 million at the midpoint. And then, as Mike has stated, there is a series of calculations that needs to happen with inflation, deflation, and how it's apportioned between the different categories. But I think if your motion just reflected more or less the Convention Center's recommendation,
Sure.
I'd be happy to provide that, or we can use that as a basis.
Sure, yeah, and I'm sorry, to be clear, my motion would be for the 2 changes recommended by the Convention Center, the 2 by the River Subcommittee, correcting page 18 of the plan to reflect those same changes. Yes, and page 9, the overall budget would then reflect 280 instead of 250.
Is there a second to that motion? And the motion has been made and seconded. Sue seconded the motion. Is there further discussion? Just for your consideration, I would say that Rusty included the items about from the River Committee, and I'm told by Eric that staff can make those easily, including paddling with rowing and changing the name of the Oklahoma City Arena to the Chesapeake Arena. We can probably get those done at the staff level if that's...
We can, and let me just also offer that we anticipate a few additional either Scrivener error changes, some formatting changes. I think we discussed it. That's a subcommittee meeting. Just to reiterate, we plan to increase the font size to make the document more readable. I mean, there are a series of non-content type changes that are going to happen naturally between now and the City Council meeting.
Chairman, I'd like to keep the motion the way I stated it at the end with the River Subcommittee and the Convention Center Subcommittee and my other comments.
All right. Are we clear? We're voting on the amendment, on including the amendment that was suggested by the Convention Center Subcommittee to amending the report that Mike has presented in that regard.
I believe Amanda's coming up to tell you you're going to have to vote on the amendment first.
And I'm not sure there actually, I didn't hear an amendment. I heard a motion from
I'm sorry, you're
Ms.
right.
LaForge.
I apologize. That's a mistake on my part. We have a motion, and he didn't amend anything.
The
He made a
motion is to recommend the report with the amendments as he stated.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. All right. Is there further discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. All right. Did everybody get their vote recorded that wanted to, or shall we go around the horseshoe? Then the chair declares the motion carried. All right. And just to follow up, Mike, with one last thing that Eric mentioned that reminded me of something, I'd like to propose to you that we increase the size of the print 3% a year so that by the time we get to 2021, it'll be in letters.
Tom, I'd like to know I enthusiastically support
Okay.
If you think it's bad on a page, you ought to read this little bitty thing.
Anyway, Mike, I want to express my personal thanks to you and to your company. I know you attended every meeting. You guys have done a great job, and you followed the instructions you've been given, and we really appreciate you being a partner and a teammate in this effort.
Well, thank you very
Many
much.
thanks.
And we appreciate all the help that we get from staff and from the subcommittee members. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, we have more items. Item 5, Eric, you're going to set the stage for that resolution for us?
I'd be happy to, Mr. Chairman. We have an additional park property for your consideration today. It's parcel V13. It's in the vicinity of Southwest 6th Street between Harvey Avenue and Robinson Avenue. This is a contract with closing costs in the total amount of $92,548, so this would be consistent with previous property acquisitions. We have some additional information that's included in the memo for you. If you also reference as an informational item the park acquisition map, you'll see that this parcel is nearly right in the middle of the north or the upper park parcel. It's V13 again, and staff is recommending that you forward this to council for approval.
All right, and there is a proposed resolution attached to the memo that is before you. It's a resolution approving this real estate purchase agreement with David A. Bracken. Is there a motion?
I would like to comment that based on the parks concurrence with this and passage, I would like to make a motion for approval as submitted.
Kim has moved approval of this and adoption of the resolution. Is there a second? Motion's been made and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The resolution is adopted. That brings us to item number 6 on the agenda, the Intermodal Transportation Hub Study. And Eric, you're going to tell us what we're going to hear about that?
Yes. Yesterday at our Transit Subcommittee meeting, this item and the following item were provided to the group as both informational, but we also had received action on both in having them receive the Intermodal Hub recommendation to locate that at the Santa Fe Depot. And so we do have Doug Tennant with us today from Jacobs. We also have Rick Kane with COPTA to make a short presentation on this. This will be the same one again that was presented yesterday. It can shorter. Can answer any questions.
Eric, we talked about an hour. Is that not what we're doing? Oh,
not today.
Okay. Oh, that was another discussion.
But we do want to encourage questions if there are any. But again, just as a little bit more background, we are participating in this study from the city's perspective in that we're providing a portion of the funding. That is some information that has come through this advisory board just a few short months ago. And so with that, Doug, thank you for being here.
Great.
Thank you,
Mr.
Doug.
Chairman, thank you. My name is Doug Tennant. I'm a senior planner with Jacobs Engineering here in Oklahoma City, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. Eric did suggest that the conversation might be lively about the budget and that I should keep my comments condensed and very to the point, so I will do that. I have several slides, but I'm going to plow through them very quickly. At the end, the bottom line, I would like to leave you kind of the old military, tell them what you're going to tell them it, and then tell them what you told them. What I'm going to tell you right now is that we had a very strong public participation process. Very much what I've witnessed here today is we had a lot of people who are very interested in transit, interested in the hub facility and how it can be a great thing for the region, but also a great thing for downtown. And through that process, they've recommended and we recommended, and it was concurred, that the Santa Fe location, the Santa Fe Station facility, be the preferred site for the proposed intermodal hub. So with that, that's the bottom line on what I want to present to you all today. But real quickly, we started with a vision. That vision was that the hub facility should be more than just be about the place where all these trains and streetcars come together. It has the potential to be that gateway feature, but it also has the potential to enhance public transit's image in this community and in the region, and also create economic development opportunities for downtown. I think we've achieved a lot of those goals with this site selection. We started with a plan that was created 5 years ago that talked about transit throughout the region, whether it's commuter rail to Edmond or Norman or Midwest City or new bus rapid transit or enhanced bus. The bottom line, the hub's main purpose is to bring all those transit features and components together in one location and be the centerpiece for that regional system. And this is just a simple graphic of how those particular elements would work, with Oklahoma City being the big circle, and how the streetcar and bus rapid transit, even light rail, might operate through and around the city. But then you reach out with commuter rail to the Edmonds and Normans and Midwest City, and even farther outside of our region to the Tulsas and Dallases with high-speed rail. We want to make sure the hub takes all of those components, all of those modes into account. We did conducted a two-tier evaluation system. Tier 1, we looked at essentially 10 sites along the main north-south BNSF rail line, because that was the logical location for the hub facility. We narrowed those down through Tier 2 to 3 sites. Site A was what we called North Bricktown, which was the parking lot over there, if you know where ACOG is, it's just north of Main Street, where the old rail line heading out north and east of town is. Site B was the Santa Fe Station and some properties around it. And then Site C, I call it the lumber yard, that property just south of I-40 and east of Shields, or Gaylord, I think it's Shields at that point. We evaluated those. Site B, the Santa Fe Station, clearly rose to the top, and rose to the top very quickly. Without going into a lot of detail, it accomplished all of those things. Its proximity to the rail line and existing platforms made it a logical choice for multimodal. It had that rail access already, but it also had proximity and economic development potential that the other 2 sites didn't have. So we recommended to the advisory committee that Site B, or the Santa Fe Station, be explored further. We thought that was the right site. Now we needed to test to see if all the things that we need, whether it's platforms or buildings, make sure those all can fit on that site. They agreed. But what they said was, and I'm going to plow through this because we'll see it later. What they said is, Doug, our concern is 2030. Our planning horizon was looking out essentially 20 years. They said, Doug, we've been around this community, MAPS 3, and this whole idea of a streetcar has elevated public transit to a level that we're concerned that 2030 and the things that were included in the transit plan 5 years ago might not be big enough. Let's think bigger. And after a spirited discussion, because we thought 2030 was the right number and the right planning horizon, we agreed with them. And they brought up several points about, hey, their main point was, let's not box ourselves in, so that if rail-based transit really explodes in this region, let's not box ourselves in and get to the point 20 years from now where we need to build another hub and get rid of the old hub because we just didn't think big enough and long-term enough. So we did some additional work. This is a very detailed and involved graphic. Bottom line, what it says is we took the transit and the commuter rail functions that were included in the original plan, and we overlaid some additional transit lines that might go to northeast Oklahoma City, that might head out to Yukon, that might go to the airport. We put as many fixed guideway type of systems, i.e. trains on a track, and we shoved them in here saying if rail-based transit explodes in this region, here's about the limit of what this region would do over the next 50 to 100 years. We tested that, and this is the eye chart version of I'd ask any of you all to look at that eye chart, but what that is a train schedule. And we had our train scheduler. We do a lot of work with Amtrak, and we schedule out hubs just like this. And what that represents is every one of those trains and those lines coming into the hub, dropping off people, picking up people, and leaving the hub. And that schedule shows how high-speed rail, commuter rail, light rail, streetcar all work together to be there at right after each other, not at the same time. They're not sharing spaces. They're not going to hit each other. That proved to us that, hey, we have, in fact, future-proofed the hub. So I think this facility and what we have, what I'm going to show you here, is a 50-year plan, at least, for the Oklahoma City region. This is just a representation of all those lines coming through the hub, where they would fit and hit on the platforms and how people would interact with the hub. I'm going to push through that real quickly and move to the pretty pictures of the hub. So what that told us, when we went through that exercise, we knew that we had enough room within the rail yard and on the street side at the hub to deal with what we need to deal with. Now we needed to make sure we had enough platform rooms and buildings. So we looked at several parking requirements, building requirements. We made sure that the hub could handle both local buses, but also intercity buses, Greyhound, and other types of those private hauler modes. We looked at streetcar, light rail, taxis, and we proposed this, essentially, this is overall master plan. And I would direct you to 2 or 3 main purposes. I'll not try to describe the design, but what the primary purpose of the hub facility, the Santa Fe station is right here in the middle, the existing facility. We see that as essentially our new Grand Central Station. That becomes the enduring symbol of this new regional transit network that we're creating. It becomes the place that we can connect downtown to Bricktown through that wall that has separated downtown and Bricktown for so long. And the way that we would do that, I'll show you in a second, but the hub facility and all these big canopies are both a literal and a figurative arching over that rail yard to connect downtown and Bricktown. And I think there's strong urban design arguments for that. From a purely technical standpoint, we can accomplish those goals and accomplish the goals of mobility and transportation at that location. How that does that, there's the Grand Hall where people would come out of downtown and move through the old tunnel. Many of you may not know that, but the old tunnel actually went to about here and then popped you up onto the rail yard. We are going to extend that and penetrate through to the other side, and it would come out right on top. Essentially, you'd be overlooking the Devon Fountain at the end of the Bricktown Canal. So you would have come out of that tunnel, and tunnel might not be the pedestrian way, and the Bricktown Canal would be right there before you. We think that's a real opportunity, again, for people to come through downtown into Bricktown and open up that portion of the canal to more activity. And it's done by accomplishing another goal, which is this whole idea of a transit hub. The garage function for high-speed rail, at some point in the long-term future, we would need a garage to deal with potential people coming in to get on a train to go to Houston. They probably want to come here, park the car, get on the train, just like they would at an airport. The garage is shown over at the U-Haul site. U-Haul buildings over to the left of that image, to the south. And the intercity bus is proposed right there. And finally, we future-proof the hub. We have enough room, expansion room, to deal with that 2050, that 50-year horizon that we were talking about. Just real quickly, here's the Santa Fe hub existing. There would be the underground tunnel pedestrian way that would put you right out on top of the Devon Fountain, and Bricktown would be out there in front of you. The 3-platform, again, same concept if expansion was needed. Here would be just a real quick rendering of downtown in the background. Essentially, we'd be standing at Zio's Italian Kitchen here, looking back through that opening in the wall into with downtown above you and the hub facility right there. Here's an aerial image with the hub facility and the canopies here in the Bricktown Canal. And then there's a rendering of what essentially you'd be at Gaylord and Reno, kind of standing up in the air, hovering, like we all might be doing in 2050. We might have some neat things that we can do, but that would be an image of the hub facility at 2050. Gaylord, we would propose to make it a great transit street that could accommodate streetcar, potentially light rail, but not at the sacrifice of moving cars through that very important artery on the edge of downtown. Phasing, the thing I would say about phasing, and all those are all pretty pictures. Cost-wise, we started pricing out this hub facility. They're big numbers. It's a big facility. The one thing that we came to when we talked about phasing, and you know, we knew there was $10 million of MAPS money, and that was not our charge to figure out how to spend it. But by gosh, you know, you put that $10 million out there, all of a sudden us planners like to figure out how to spend that money. But the one thing we figured out is that the one thing we know is that you have to control the site. That to be able to implement any of those pretty pictures, the one thing you need to do is own the real estate. And that's the one thing that you absolutely don't have right now. So our phase one recommendation is really all about controlling that site. And if you spent your $10 million to control the site, and I'm not saying that's what it is, the numbers are there for you, that would be probably job one in our recommendation. I could tell you how to spend a lot more of that $10 million, but with all the things going on downtown, Project 180, the potential streetcar program, we're not sure that money wouldn't be, we wouldn't tear up something we just built. So what we do know is job one is to control the site, and that would be our recommendation. All these other costs are in the future as the system gets built and the hub is needed, but there are real opportunities right now, I think, to control the site, and that would be our ultimate recommendation. So, Mr. Chairman, Eric, that's our presentation on the hub.
Thank you, Doug. Are there questions, comments, Eric?
Again, we wanted to bring this information to you. This is what the Transit Subcommittee did yesterday. It's obviously a function of the advisory board because it's going to be a future project that we're most likely going to take on as a portion of the hub itself. But today, what we're asking for your consideration is to receive the recommendation to locate the facility at the Santa Fe station. There's going to be a formal report that's coming to you, but not knowing exactly what may happen in the next few weeks or months as that's created, we just wanted to go ahead and have you receive what we have to date, and then when that report is finalized, we'll also bring that back to you as well.
Zane?
As a member of the Transit Subcommittee, I'd like to echo what Eric said and say that our recommendation is that you receive the report as you've received it today.
Is there further discussion? Would you like to make that?
I'll make a motion to that effect.
All right, it's been moved that we receive the report as submitted. Is there a second? Motion's been made and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Doug, many thanks for being here today and for getting it done in such an efficient way. Thank you. Next item, Eric, you're going to tell us about the alternative analysis report for Greater Downtown.
We do have included in your packet the draft report. You obviously see that it's quite extensive. This is a lot of work that COPTA and Jacobs have been working on for quite some time. It's a much broader and larger picture than just the MAPS 3 transit projects. Also staying brief, we wanted to invite Doug back up and to just give you a short update on the alternatives analysis and the status that it is today. I think one of the things that you'll find is it's going to be an ongoing process, and there's a slide that I think that he'll show you that exhibits where we are today and where we're headed as next steps. But again, with this was presented to the Transit Subcommittee yesterday. City Council did consider this, and it is moved on since their July 19th meeting, but we wanted you to be up to speed as well. Again, thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Eric. I was at the City Council meeting where they contemplated and eventually approved what we call the locally preferred alternative, which is the map of the proposed streetcar urban circulator route. And I think that was a couple weeks ago. And I would tell you all, I like going to those meetings like Mr. Dover, you said it, you like being in discussions like this. It always gives me confidence that we have good leaders sitting around this horseshoe because I was amazed at the comments they made, their understanding and information, and understanding what a streetcar is all about and what potential it has for this community. So I would tell you all, anything you do as a proposed action out of this board, you're sending it to a body that already is, well, that train, their thought process on this proverbial train on the track is well underway, and so you'd be adding to their understanding. Where we are, the alternatives now is a federal process. The bottom line on this is that we've been working with COPPA and the city and FTA, which is that federal funding agency, to maintain the city's options and opportunities to get federal funding that could complement and add to the local MAPS funding and make the streetcar program, the streetcar project, even that much more better, bigger, and of benefit to the community. So in that, we're at the tail end of the alternatives analysis, in which we had several public meetings, again, a very strong and healthy public process where people became educated, people became informed, and I think when that happens, good decisions come forth, and I would say that's what happened. The bottom line of the AA study was essentially a bigger, broader view of the streetcar program, not just downtown, but concentrating on downtown, but looking at how the streetcar could connect all these districts in downtown and maybe just outside of downtown, connect it to enhance mobility, to provide economic development potential, and just increase the ability of this community to become the 21st century city that it wants to become. That was based on the fixed skyway study that we talked about with the hub study, and the hub study is a part of that baseline understanding of the streetcar system and the AA. Part of the AA is recommending a technology, and the recommended technology was the modern streetcar. I think you all have a pretty good understanding of that. I won't belabor what that vehicle is and what it tries to do, but it would be a significant investment and a significant enhancement to the public transit program for your community, and it'll take downtown to a new level. The recommended LPA, the locally preferred alternative, is a route that essentially consists of two parts. The core part, what I call the midtown to downtown to Bricktown, is a long couplet that starts up at 11th and 13th Street and then comes down Broadway and Robinson and then turns and becomes a couplet like a loop at Sheridan and Reno. That connects Midtown to downtown to Bricktown. It has strong ridership. There's a lot of economic development opportunities along that route, but paired with that is also an additional route that starts on 4th at the Downtown Transit Center and moves its way across the interstate and heads on up to the Oklahoma Health Center, because there's a strong connection between the transit center and the health center and downtown. So the final locally preferred alternative includes both of those options. What that entire system, that entire route includes is about 7.5 miles of track, an 8 to 12 minute frequency, and that's very important. The advantages of the streetcar is that, one, the tracks are right there, the rails are there, you know where that train's going to go, you know where that streetcar's going because you can see the tracks heading off, but you also know when it's coming. The stations will have LED printouts that let you know that, hey, the next train arrives in 4 minutes, or the next train arrives in 2 minutes. So you're always updated as to when that train gets there, and that frequency is enough that people would say, hey, 8 minutes is not too long to wait for the next train. The spaces, the stations, the stops are spaced about 3 blocks apart so that you can pick up enough riders to make it economical. There's about 1,200 daily boardings in the opening year. That is, we think, a conservative number, but it's a strong number. I mean, that's what Portland, Seattle, kind of the prototypes for the modern streetcar, that's what they did in their first years. And their cities that are a lot different than ours, we think 1,200 is a good number, and it's a strong opening year projection for the streetcar. Finally, the estimated construction cost for that entire system is $147 million today, if we bid it today. Because the FTA has rules like you all with MAPS escalating money as the years go on, our year of expenditure, MAPS is 2016, our year of expenditure was 2017. So that bumps up to about a $200 million project when it's all said and done. I would tell you, we didn't try to make it that, but if you take the $120 million that's totally dedicated to the streetcar program and pair it up with the potential $75 million in federal funds that are out there, potentially. There's no guarantee of it. There's no guarantee that the money will even be there with what's going on in Washington. But 120 and 75 makes it about a $195 million project, which is right in the crosshairs of what we think can get done under this program. Where we are on next steps, we're going to take the work that you have there. That draft report has been submitted to FTA. FTA, and Rick may want to speak to this, but FTA now is becoming a bigger player in this whole process. As you get closer and closer to having your project become one of their projects, theirs being FTA's, they want to get more involved and start holding hands a little bit closer as you move through it, because the old proverbial strings attached to that money, which we're glad for, because every discussion that we've had with FTA, they like this project, they like what's happening, they just need time to catch up to what we've already been doing. So I think, so what we're trying to do is start a logical process for them to review our work. ACOG is adopting that locally preferred alternative into the overall regional plan to cross that T and dot that I. We're starting the NEPA environmental process, which is another it's just another process in the FTA funding window. But the bottom line out of all this, and I think Eric's staff and Rick's staff have been very intentional about doing all the right things to keep this project in line to get federal funding if that federal funding is available and ready. So I think you all through your staff and through the city staff have done the right kind of things to make the streetcar program not just only a MAPS 3 streetcar program, but potentially a bigger and better thing for MAPS 3. So you could not only deliver what you said you promised, but maybe even more than what you promised. So that's our presentation on that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Doug. Are there questions for Doug from members of the committee? Eric, did you want to add anything?
I think just a couple of closing comments on this. We're going to provide continued or periodic updates as we make progress. There is a draft report in your packet today. Again, it's already been considered by council, but we wanted you to receive that also just as a part of information today. So we would receive any action that you'd like to take on that. The subcommittee did so last night. But again, we're available for questions.
Michael?
Yeah, great presentation. Thank you. Great presentation. Now, quick question. Have you all got into the issue of the fees, if any, fares, and also the whole issue of operating costs and where those dollars are?
We have, as a part of the final report, and I'll let Rick maybe talk to that if he would so choose, as a part of that final report to FDA, we'll have to have an operations plan, and we're working with COPPA right now to finalize that. The fees are a discussion, an ongoing discussion. In some communities, to gin up ridership, they make it free. Now, I would tell you there are drawbacks to that. Anything free sometimes is not treated as nicely as it should be because it's free. You don't. Free connotates it doesn't cost much money, and that's not what. So we're going to have the discussions, but I think what I've heard in all of the discussions is that this is something that is of public benefit, and we're going to make the fares enough, or make whatever fare structure we have be reachable by all the community and all the people that need to use it. But those discussions aren't final, and we're working through FTA and through the city to get to that point.
Zane?
I'd just like to add that the Transit Subcommittee last night heard this presentation, and we moved a measure or passed a measure to pass it on to the advisory board to carry to the city council.
So you want to move that we
I'd like
receive
to
it now?
move that we receive this report now.
Is there a second? Motion been made and seconded that we receive the report. Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The report is received. Doug, thank you again.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. All right. We're now, I guess that brings us to subcommittee reports. Well, we have, I guess item 7 is discussion, action on any MAVS 3 program. Anything you have under that that wouldn't come under the informational items, Eric?
You know, the informational items are attached, and I think we've discussed those in the meeting thus far. I did want to provide just a brief opportunity. I know Jovan has sat patiently with us. If we'd like to invite him up as a part of the update, he could update us just on the status of land acquisition over the past month.
Over time, we found that his reports are really great if we get them in before lunch. Jovan? Well,
I got it. If I think there's a map in your packet, and as Amanda reminded me that evidently they want us to get out of the chamber pretty quickly because I think they've cut the air to us in here. Or it feels that way in the audience. You guys may be as comfortable as can be up there. Marsh's got a smile on his face. I'm Jovan Bullard with Oklahoma City Urban Renewal Authority. And on your map, I believe the 3 differences from the previous map, the last time I visited with you, are parcels 2 and 5 in the upper left corner. Those show now in the light blue, offers being made, and also parcel V12 is now under property acquired. And of course, there are movements with all the other parcels in various stages, but not enough to get them out of that color into the next one. But we're moving along, and more of the property owners are not accepting our offers, and so city legal staff is looking at how much condemnation action is going to be necessary, and more it seems to be going that way, unfortunately.
Thank you, Jovan.
I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Kimberly, did you have anything from the park committee about this? So this is the park acquisition? Yes.
There was some discussion yesterday, of course, about those properties which are now being referred for litigation and possible condemnation. And I think there was some hope that some of those folks in those properties would realize that they have some great offers at hand that maybe reconsider.
The first commissioner's award that came back were not positive in our direction, but I hope that's an anomaly. The 3 commissioners that were appointed by the court seem to give a great deal of value to the location right next to the new interstate alignment, which doesn't make a lot of sense because there's no direct access there. Plus, you can't put up a billboard or anything. So I couldn't figure out why they raised that value. Hopefully, the next commissioner's award come in will be a bit more realistic, and we'll get the property owners realizing that the property, is not the gold mine they think it is.
Well, our committee certainly appreciates all your hard work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Eric, you wanted to add?
I don't have anything further. I mean, we obviously have the informational items. If there's any questions on those, I'd be happy to answer those now.
I was just going to, are we seeing that our budget for land acquisition is adequate or going to be more?
The answer is yes. It's well within the marks of what we've established in the implementation plan. So all is good at this time.
And my comments are based on our appraisals that we've gone out, and I've tried to be very, very fair and to make property owners whole with our appraisal value that is our initial offer to the owner.
Thank you, Jovan. We appreciate it. We have now taken care of item 8 and item 10, the informational items. And I didn't want to skip by item 9. I know that every member has had a chance to talk about their committee's work, but does any committee chair want to add anything else from the subcommittees today?
I would like to add just one thing. In addition to what the reports that you received and passed on today, and the motions for the acceptance of the ADG plan, I believe next month, you will see a motion that we pass to go ahead with the acquisition of the Santa Fe property. But that will come at the next advisory board.
Okay, Kim?
The only last comment I have, and thank you all for helping me with my committee report today, is that our committee is going to be working very diligently on now the MAPS projects that will be bounding, since the convention center site has now been selected and transit is being laid out, that we will begin working more in tandem with those projects so that we can visualize what's around us and build the type of park that we need to.
Thank you, Kim. Any other subcommittee chair have anything to add? All right. That brings us to item 11. Are there any other items that members of the advisory board would like to bring forward today? Staff, Eric, do you have anything else that we've forgotten to do?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I want to then offer the opportunity for citizens who may be with us, who have a comment or a request to be heard by the committee. Is there someone? Please, come forward and identify yourself.
Good morning or afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Nick Roberts, 516 Waterview Road. I first wanted to start off saying, well, I'm not going to waste much time saying how much I appreciate the hard work you guys are doing here and how much I like the gravy train that's departing from this station, other than the fact that I do kind of agree with Dr. Shadid on many things regarding the convention center. But I wanted to address the overall MAPS 3 plan and some concerns that some people have been raising, that the urban planning concepts of what we're doing here with MAPS 3 seem to be falling apart. This was based on a Quarter Shore task force implementation plan that was developed 4 or 5 years ago. That plan is no more. You guys killed that, probably for the best, but I'm just saying that you guys killed the urban planning scheme that we had that we were trying to accomplish with MAPS 3. And I think that we need to go back and come up with a new one. There needs to be another Quarter Shore planning task force project. This needs to address moving the convention center from beside the park to the boulevard. This needs to address what we're going to accomplish with the boulevard, because it appears that we're going to have a boulevard that will be too wide, likely not urban at all, and will not be bounded by any real development. It will be bounded by super blocks everywhere along the line. You guys also killed the mixed-use development that was going to anchor the boulevard when you approved the convention center to go there instead. So these are urban planning concerns that I think have been taking a seat in the caucus to economic development concerns. We have an economic development plan with the convention center, with the fairgrounds, with the streetcar, these things that are going to be a catalyst for economic development activity within the community. But we don't have that plan for the actual property, how this stuff lines up on the street grid. And I think that there needs to be a committee that comes together and puts this into a plan. And it would be nice if there could be something that a single document or a single room where people stood together and they talked about Project 180 and how this affects the streetcar and how that affects the convention center and how that affects the boulevard and how that affects the new I-40 and how that affects the new park. And the new park is an interesting thing because I don't get the great sense that the park committee has the sense of direction with where they should go with this in the aftermath of the Myriad Gardens. Because the park was planned to be our nice park, and we never anticipated that that would be the Myriad Gardens, or that the Myriad Gardens could ever be as nice as it is now, that Devin has provided us with the funds to renovate it. So what do you do with a park that is disconnected but just 1 block away from this urban treasure that is the Myriad Gardens? And I don't sense that there's an understanding of how you accomplish that or what you want to accomplish with that possibility. Here's an idea. You guys could just use the convention center site that you've decided to acquire, and you could just use that for park expansion since it is contiguous. Why do we have to have 2 separate parks in downtown, a block apart from each other? That doesn't make an ounce of sense. Instead, it makes much more sense to expand the Myriad Gardens and build on what we have. I just think that MAPS 3 currently as it is a 2008 document or plan. and we need a 2012 plan. So much has changed and been revolutionized in the last 4 years, and I think there needs to be an understanding of where this is going. This feels very disconnected and dysfunctional, and there are efficiencies that I think could be realized just by coming together and having one large master plan for what we're doing with downtown. Thank you.
Well, Nick, thank you very much. We'll forward your comments. I think all of us understand that when you plan something that'll take a decade to finish, that there will be changes. And I think your comments are well placed. And we will make every effort to see that they're taken forward to the appropriate people to consider them. And I appreciate you being here today. Thank you. Is there anything further? If not, we're adjourned. 12 o'clock.
Good job.